Now, some of you may choose to exclusively be print designers, and some may only want to do screen design. But the likelihood that you do a bit or a lot of both is likely very high. So, being said, there's a few key concepts you need to know so when you go to set up your document, you do so correctly. All right, so let's begin with designers use relative and absolute units of measure. So relative units include units such as a percentage, let's say 50% of something. So one size is relative to something else. Now we can take this a step further, and if you do web work, you'll also work with an M. And in this case, an M is not like an N or an M, which is the width of a character in typography. In this case, an M is based on the selected font size height in pixels set in a web browser's preferences. And this setting is user adjustable. And the whole idea is if you go into a web browser, into the preferences, and you change the default height, you're making type larger or smaller. And this is for usability, for people that might need larger type to be able to see the type, to read the type. So if the default pixel height for type in a web browser is 16, which it is, then 1em equals 16 pixels. If the user were to change the default pixel height in the preferences to 32 pixels, then 1em equals 32 pixels. All right? If you do web work, you'll get used to it. The next is a rem, and it's a root M. And in this case, the designer would set the root font size. Maybe they set the font size to 12 pixels. Maybe they choose 16 pixels. Where I'm going with this is in the HTML or the body element in the styles or the CSS, they would set the root level. And if they set the root level to 16 pixels, then 1rem would be 16 pixels. If they set the height of the font to 45 pixels, then 1rem would be 45 pixels. Okay, so we're using relative units of measure to represent the size or the distance. Okay, now we have absolute, and I put relative here again, so this should be absolute units. And I should point out, this is screen up here. Absolute units can also be used in screen, okay? And they can be used in print. In print, we would use percentage. We probably would not be using M and rem. But in print, we could use percentage as well as pixels, okay? And we'll also talk about picas and points. Let me go ahead and bold this one here. All right, so now let's talk about absolute units. Absolute units, designers use pixels, and 72 to 96 pixels per inch is pretty common. Now, Adobe still embraces, especially in Photoshop, 72 pixels in an inch. But devices are changing. I would say every year, but it's probably every 6 months. It might even be more often than that. Things change in our design environment. It's a fluid environment. You're always learning. You're always striving to keep up. Being said, it's not uncommon now that there are 96 pixels per inch, depending on the device. Okay? Now, also depending on the device, we deal with pixel density, and that is how many pixels are in a particular amount of space. And it really comes down to the size of the pixels. They just keep making them smaller and smaller. Okay, so we can fit more and more and more in what was an existing amount of space. Okay, let's say 1 inch. Picas and points. Designers use picas and points because points are very precise. Generally, there are 72 points in 1 inch. Now, technically, there's a bit more, but then we have to start working with decimal points, and it's more complicated. So generally, it's rounded off to 72 points in 1 inch. There are 12 points in 1 pica. There are 6 picas in 1 inch. Okay? So when we go to create a document, we're going to go into our preferences and we are going to choose units which meet our need for that particular content we are creating. Next, because you're going to have to deal with this when you create a document, designers use various color models. In the print world, CMYK or process color is most common. 4-color process, where we use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black to represent, mixing these colors in percentages, they will represent all of the colors in the spectrum. Now, there's a lot more to learning and understanding CMYK or process color. And you will likely learn more in your graphic design classes, especially design classes with an agenda, if you will, more on print. Okay? Now, print designers also use Pantone or spot color, and this is a single mixed ink color. It's usually cheaper to use a spot color or 1 or 2 spot colors than the 4-color process, because you would end up having less amount of negatives, less amount of plates. Again, you'll learn more about the print process in graphic design classes. This class, our focus is on digital media for screen and devices. All right, now screen color modes. RGB, or red, green, and blue light. Now, we will also, or you will also know RGB as RGB triplets, where values of 0 to 255 will represent up to 256 values for each main color. So as an example, if we're going to have an RGB triplet, 1 for red, 1 for green, 1 for blue, then 255, 255, 255 equals white. Okay? 0, 0, 0 would equal black. In web environments, we use hexadecimals. You'll often hear, well, you might not often hear, but technically, I believe we would say bihexadecimals, okay? Because it's 2 character combinations. Now, the combination of the characters A through F and the numerals 0 through 9 are used to represent red, green, and blue color on a screen. So it's combinations of 2 of A through F, 0 through 9, and we can mix the letters and the numerals. So as an example, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, each 2 zeros representing red, green, blue. That will equal black. If we had FF, 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 then we would have white. All right, last part. and that is color profiles ensure color accuracy. Now, if you're in a photography class, you're in a print class, then you're going to use a color profile to create accuracy for that content in that environment. Again, we are screen based, so in our world, we're going to use standardized red, green, and blue, known as sRGB color profile. All right, so what I encourage you to do is take this information, go and do some research, and this is the type of content that is all about rote memorization at first. You're going to learn about it, you're going to memorize it, then you're going to be able to apply this content, apply this information to your projects accordingly and appropriately.